was 23 years old when I first crossed the border with $200,000 taped to my body. It was February 2023, and I had no idea I was about to become part of the largest cartel infrastructure ever built on American soil. My name doesn't matter anymore.
What matters is that I survived to tell this, and that every word you're about to read is the truth. I grew up in Laredo, Texas, on the American side, but my family was from Nuevo Laredo. My father worked at the World Trade Bridge, inspecting trucks for customs. He died when I was 17. A heart attack, they said, but I knew better.
He'd seen too much, knew too many names, and one day his heart just stopped asking questions. I finished high school, got a degree in accounting from a community college, and thought I'd work clean jobs forever. But clean jobs in Laredo pay $7 an hour, and the rent doesn't care about your principals. My cousin Miguel called me one night. He said he had work for someone who knew numbers, someone smart, someone nobody would suspect. I told him I wasn't interested in that life. He laughed and said I was already in it. I just didn't know it yet. 2 days later, I met a man named El Flaco in a parking lot behind a Whataburger in South Laredo. He wore a cowboy's cap and drove a Ford F-250 that looked like every other truck in Texas. He didn't threaten me. He didn't need to.
He opened a duffel bag in his back seat and showed me more cash than I'd ever seen in my life.
He said the Jalisco New Generation Cartel needed people like me, Americans with clean records, people who could move money without raising flags. He said they were building something bigger than smuggling. They were building a corridor. I didn't understand what he meant by corridor until 3 months later. By then, I'd already made 6 runs across the border, each time carrying between $100,000 and $300,000 in cash. The system was simple. I'd pick up the money in Laredo, drive north to San Antonio, deposit it in small increments across 15 different banks using fake business accounts, then wire it to shell companies in Nevada and Delaware. Nobody asks questions. Nobody ever does when you're wearing a button-down shirt and driving a clean Camry. But the money was just the beginning. El Flaco introduced me to a man called El Contador, a finance guy who'd worked for the Sinaloa cartel before switching sides to the CJNG. He told me the Jalisco boys were tired of paying taxes to every 2-bit gang between Guadalajara and Dallas. They wanted control, total control, and that meant owning the checkpoints, the inspection stations, the entire infrastructure of the southern border. He showed me maps. Real maps, with 22 locations marked in red. Eagle Pass, Del Rio, Laredo, McAllen, Brownsville, El Paso. Every major crossing point in Texas had been targeted. He said half of them were already compromised. I didn't believe him at first. This was America, the Department of Homeland Security, Border Patrol. You couldn't just buy your way into the system. But El Contador smiled like a man who'd seen empires fall. He said I was naive. He said the CJNG had been infiltrating for over 2 years and that by the end of 2024, they'd have access to every southern route into the United States. The first time I saw it work, I was crossing through Eagle Pass with a load of migrant families. That's how they did it. They used the chaos of immigration as cover. Trucks full of crying children, women with infants, men desperate for work, and buried under their feet, wrapped in black plastic inside the wheel wells and under seats, were bricks of fentanyl, methamphetamine, and American weapons going south. I was driving a white passenger van that day, playing the part of a volunteer with a fake humanitarian organization. The officer at the checkpoint was a guy named Ramirez. He was on the payroll. I knew because El Flaco told me his name 3 days before. When Ramirez saw me, he waved me through without even opening the back doors. 12 people crossed that day. 4 of them were cartel. The rest had no idea they were being used. That's when I realized how deep this went. It wasn't just about bribes. It was about embedding people, turning infrastructure. building a machine that could move anything, anyone, anywhere without interference. And the CJNG wasn't working alone.
They had ex-military, American citizens, former cops, people with access, people with clearance, people who'd sold their country for $30,000 a month.
By mid-2024, the operation had grown beyond anything I could have imagined. We weren't just moving drugs anymore. We were moving guns, bulk cash, encrypted communications equipment, and intelligence. There were over 5,000 men working inside the corridor, scattered across Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. Some were enforcers, ex-soldiers from the Mexican army who defected to the cartel. Others were logistics, guys like me, people who made sure the money flowed and the routes stayed clear. And then there were the ghosts, the ones who never showed their faces, the ones who worked inside American agencies and fed information back to Jalisco. I met one of them once. His name was Ortega, and he worked for a private security contractor that had contracts with DHS. He didn't look like a criminal. He looked like a middle manager, balding, overweight, wearing khakis and a polo shirt with the company logo. But Ortega had access to shift schedules, patrol routes, surveillance blind spots, and classified reports on cartel activity. He sold all of it. For 2 years, the CJNG knew exactly when and where to move because Ortega told them he wasn't the only one. There were others, Border Patrol agents, customs officers, local cops in towns like Uvalde and Del Rio.
They all had one thing in common. They believed they wouldn't get caught. And for a long time, they were right.
I started noticing things changing in late 2024. There were more feds around, more surveillance, drones flying routes they hadn't flown before. One of our drivers got pulled over near San Antonio with a clean truck, nothing inside, but the officers searched it for 4 hours anyway. They didn't find anything, but it rattled everyone. El Flaco told us to stay low, that the heat would pass, but El Contador wasn't so sure. He said someone was talking. He said the Americans were building a case, and when they moved, it would be fast and brutal. I didn't believe him. We'd been operating for over 2 years without a single major bust.
We had people inside the system. We had routes that had never been compromised. I thought we were untouchable. I was wrong. On the night of March 2nd, 2025, I got a call from Miguel.
He was panicking. He said the feds were everywhere, that they'd hit 3 safe houses in Laredo and arrested 15 people in the last 6 hours. He said it was coordinated, that it wasn't just local cops, it was DHS, FBI, DEA, and Border Patrol all moving at once. He told me to run. I didn't. I should have.
But I thought I was clean. I thought my role was too small, too buried in paperwork and wire transfers to matter. I thought they didn't know my name.
At 3:17 in the morning on March 3rd, my front door exploded inward. I woke up to flashlights in my face, shouting, hands yanking me out of bed and slamming me onto the floor. There were 8 agents in tactical gear, rifles pointed at my head. Someone screaming that I was under arrest for conspiracy to traffic narcotics, money laundering, and racketeering. They zip-tied my wrists so tight I lost feeling in my hands. They dragged me outside in my boxers and threw me into the back of a black SUV. The entire street was lit up like a war zone. Helicopters circling overhead. Armored vehicles blocking both ends of the road. Neighbors standing on their porches, filming everything on their phones. I saw my landlord staring at me like I was a monster.
I wanted to scream that I wasn't a killer, that I'd never hurt anyone, that I just moved money, but it didn't matter. In their eyes, I was cartel.
The ride to the federal building in San Antonio took 2 hours. They didn't say a word to me the entire time. When we arrived, they walked me through a basement entrance and into a freezing concrete room with a steel table and 2 chairs. They left me there for 6 hours. No water, no food, no phone call. Just me and the sound of my own breathing. waiting for whatever came next. The agent who finally walked in wasn't what I expected. He was older, late 50s, gray hair, tired eyes, wearing a suit that looked like he'd slept in it. His name was Davidson, and he worked for Homeland Security investigations.
He sat down across from me and opened a folder. Inside were surveillance photos. Me at the Whataburger, me at the bank in San Antonio, me crossing through Eagle Pass.
He slid them across the table one by one, slowly, like he was dealing cards. Then he showed me something that made my blood stop. It was a chart. A massive organizational chart with hundreds of names, photos, and connections. At the top was Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes El Mencho, the leader of the CJNG. Below him were regional commanders, plaza bosses, and enforcers. And then, halfway down the page, I saw my name, small, circled in red, connected to El Contador and El Flaco. Davidson didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He just looked at me and said 5 words that broke me. You were never that small. He told me they'd been watching for 14 months. He said they knew about the 22 compromised checkpoints, the 5,000 operatives, the weapons, the cash, the intelligence leaks, all of it. He said the operation that hit my house wasn't random. It was the culmination of the largest coordinated federal action against a cartel on American soil in history. Over 4 days, they'd arrested 127 people, seized 43 vehicles, recovered $11 million in cash, and shut down every single route the CJNG had built in Texas. He said I was lucky. Most of the guys they grabbed that night were enforcers. Guys with blood on their hands. I was just a mule, a smart mule, but still just a mule. He said if I cooperated, I might see daylight again before I turned 50. I didn't cooperate, not at first. I kept my mouth shut for 3 weeks. They moved me to a county jail in Berar, and I sat in a cell with 2 other guys, both of them low-level dealers who wouldn't shut up about their cases. I didn't talk to anyone.
I didn't call my family. I just sat there, replaying everything in my head, trying to figure out where it all went wrong. Then Miguel was found dead. They said it was suicide.
Hung himself with a bedsheet in his cell. But I knew better. The cartel doesn't let people sit in jail and talk. They clean up loose ends. And Miguel knew too much. After that, I started talking.
I told Davidson everything. The routes, the names, the safe houses, the corrupt agents. I gave them Ortega. I gave them Ramirez. I gave them 12 other names of people inside the system who were feeding the CJNG. I didn't do it because I wanted to be a hero. I did it because I wanted to live.
And because I realized that the people I thought were my brothers would kill me the second I became a liability, Davidson kept his word. I was sentenced to 8 years with the possibility of parole in 4. I'm in a federal facility now, protective custody, isolated from general population. I'll never go back to Laredo. I'll never see my family again. The cartel has a long memory, and I'm a dead man the second I step outside these walls. But here's what keeps me up at night. The operation that took us down was massive, the biggest in history. And yeah, they got a lot of us, but they didn't get everyone. I know for a fact that at least 6 people on the inside, people with clearance, people with access, were never arrested. I don't know if they flipped, if they're still feeding information, or if they just got lucky. But I know the CJNG didn't disappear.
You don't dismantle an organization like that with one operation. You wound it, you slow it down, but it adapts, it rebuilds, and it comes back stronger.
The corridor might be broken now, but corridors can be rebuilt. Routes can be reestablished. People can be bought. And the next time, they'll be smarter. They'll know what mistakes we made. They'll know how we got caught. I think about that every day. I think about the fact that somewhere out there in a safe house in Jalisco or a boardroom in Guadalajara, someone is already planning the next move. And the Americans, for all their raids and press conferences and celebrations, still don't understand the most important thing. The CJNG didn't infiltrate the border because they were desperate. They did it because they could, because the system was for sale. And until that changes, until the corruption is rooted out from the inside, this war will never end.
I was part of something bigger than I ever imagined, and I'll spend the rest of my life paying for it.
But the people who built the corridor, the ones who made it possible, the ones who sold their badges and their oaths for cash, most of them are still out there, still working, still waiting.
And that terrifies me more than anything. I didn't cooperate, not at first. I kept my mouth shut for 3 weeks.
They moved me to a county jail in Bexar County, San Antonio, a overcrowded facility where I was placed in protective custody.
Isolated from the general population because they knew what happened to cartel cooperators in jail. I sat in a cell with 2 other guys, both of them low-level dealers who wouldn't shut up about their cases, about how they were going to beat the charges, how their lawyers were working on deals, how they'd be out in 6 months. I didn't talk to anyone. I didn't call my family. I didn't write letters. I just sat there replaying everything in my head, trying to figure out where it all went wrong, who had talked first, who had given them my name. Then I found out Miguel was dead. It happened on March 24th, 3 weeks after the raids. They said it was suicide, that he'd hung himself with a bedsheet in his cell at the Webb County Jail in Laredo. But I knew better. I knew how the CJNG operated. I knew they didn't let people sit in jail and wait for trials where they might be pressured to talk. They cleaned up loose ends. They sent messages. Miguel knew too much. He knew names, routes, faces, and someone decided he was a liability. I don't know if it was another inmate, someone the cartel paid to do it, or if the guards just looked the other way while it happened. All I know is that Miguel was 25 years old, and he died alone in a concrete cell, and nobody except me seemed to care. That's when I started talking. Not because I wanted to be a hero, not because I believed in justice or redemption or any of that bullshit. I talked because I wanted to live. Because I realized that the people I thought were my brothers, the people I'd worked for, the people who'd paid me and trusted me and brought me into their world, would kill me the second I became a liability. And I was already a liability. I told Davidson everything. I gave him the routes, the names, the addresses of safe houses I'd visited. I gave him the bank accounts, the shell companies, the fake businesses we'd used to launder money. I gave him Ortega's full name even though he'd already been arrested. I gave him Ramirez. I gave him the name of the truck inspector at the World Trade Bridge, the man who worked where my father had died. I gave him 12 other names of people inside the system who were feeding the CJNG information, people who hadn't been arrested yet, people who thought they'd gotten away clean. Some of them were arrested within days, others disappeared, probably warned by someone still inside, probably already in Mexico, beyond the reach of American law. I didn't feel good about it. I didn't feel like I was doing the right thing. I just felt empty, hollowed out, like I'd traded one form of survival for another. Davidson kept his word. The U.S. Attorney's Office offered me a plea deal. I pled guilty to conspiracy to commit money laundering and conspiracy to transport monetary instruments. The other charges were dropped. I was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison with the possibility of parole in 4. It could have been worse. Some of the guys arrested with me got 20, 30, even 40 years. The enforcers, the ones with bodies on their records, they'll die in prison, but I'm not free. I'm sitting in a federal correctional institution in Pennsylvania, far from the border, far from Texas, far from anyone who knows me. I'm in protective custody, isolated from the general population because the CJNG has people everywhere, even in here. And if they find out I cooperated, I'm dead. I'll never go back to Laredo. I'll never see my family again. My mother doesn't know where I am. She thinks I disappeared, that I'm hiding,
that maybe I'm in Mexico somewhere. It's better that way.
Safer for her. The cartel has a long memory, and I'm a dead man the second I step outside these walls. But here's what keeps me up at night. What gnaws at me every single day. The operation that took us down was massive, the biggest in history, they said. Front page news, press conferences, politicians congratulating law enforcement, talking about how they dealt a crippling blow to the CJNG, how they dismantled the corridor, how the border was safer now. And yeah, they got a lot of us, over 100 arrests, millions of dollars seized, routes shut down, but they didn't get everyone. I know for a fact that at least 6 people on the inside, people with clearance, people with access to sensitive information, were never arrested. I gave Davidson their names.
I told him exactly what they did, how much they were paid, how they operated, but nothing happened.
I don't know if they flipped before I did, if they cut deals and disappeared into witness protection, or if they're still out there, still working, still feeding information to whoever's rebuilding the operation. Because the CJNG didn't disappear. Cartels don't disappear.
You don't dismantle an organization like that with one operation. No matter how big, no matter how coordinated, you wound it, you slow it down, you force it to adapt, but it doesn't die.
Within 6 months of the raids, I started hearing things, rumors from other inmates, stories from people who still had connections outside.